Good morning, everyone. Can anyone
Good
hear me?
morning. Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, good morning. My name is Okenera Siloko. I'm the current publicity secretary for the Nape YP, and I want to welcome every one of us here to today's meeting. This is one of our monthly, August edition of our monthly technical series event, and we're excited here to have all of you here with us. Today, we are honored and thrilled to have a wonderful guest in our midst, the person of Dr. Anomeze. He's a senior production geologist from Seplat and is going to be um, taking us through the basic principle for brownfield development. And we are going to learn a lot today. So um, along, along the way, just to give us a brief of the schedule we have for today, we we're going to start with the opening remarks, and of course, that will take about 10 minutes. Then the webinar proper will start, which will last for about 90 minutes. Hopefully, we'll be done to around 12:40. Then we'll have a section for questions and answers. And so I want every one of us to pay attention. And there are raffle. Please, if you're just joining, can you please mute your mic? Thank you. So we'll have raffle draws and give vouchers at the end of these webinars, and of course we'll have our closing remark. So give or take in about 2 hours, 15 minutes, we should be done with this section. So, I want to welcome every one of us here again, and I want to also apologize on behalf of our Nape YP lead, the person of Flora Nishobo is not here on the call at the moment due to some assignment he has to attend on our behalf. So I want to welcome every one of us, and the Nape YP is glad to have Dr. David Anusebe in our midst. So before we proceed, I will quickly just want to read a brief profile of Dr. David Anomeze. David Anomeze is a senior production geologist with Seplat Energy PLC. He has a bachelor's degree in geological sciences and also a master's degree in applied geophysics and a doctorate degree in petroleum geology. He has an MBA from Quantic School of Business and Technology. He is a recipient of various scholarships for his academic programs. He was a student chapter president of the NAPE at the Nnamdi Azikiwe University from 2008 to 2009. He started his career as a graduate intern, a geologist in Shell Petroleum Development Company after he worked for Nubian Group Nigeria Limited, Erin Energy, Laser Engineering and Resource Consult Limited, and Moni Pulu, which is Production Development Limited, as a senior geologist. He has worked in exploration, development, production, operations, and WRFM teams. He's a recipient of the 2015 Best Geology Paper presenter at the Society of Exploration Geophysicists IGSC conference in Prague. That was in Czech Republic. He's a member of NAPE, APG, SEG, EAG, SP, and NGA. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dr. David Anumeze. Good morning, sir. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Okay, so I will share my screen.
Okay, so can I go ahead and share my screen?
Yes. The floor is yours now, sir.
All right, thank you. Please just confirm if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your feed, your screen.
All right, so thank you very much, Nape YP team. And it's a pleasure again to be among you people to present one thing which I feel is very, very relevant to us as Nigerians and the industry at large. We know a lot of companies in Nigeria many years back, I think it's at early 2000, who started up the marginal field operations. And so many companies, at least we have about 6 companies that are effectively able to, manage those marginal fields. And also beyond that, we have other assets that have been acquired by some of these companies from the major IOCs. And one of the key things you look out for is, okay, how do you develop these assets such that it becomes economically viable and without so much, financial implication? That's the essence of it. Because for a brownfield means a lot of the existing reserves have been drained. What you're just looking out for, okay, what is that remaining opportunities? Sometimes it even gets a stage where you can decide to call it a late life development. So you try and get what is that remaining opportunities that you can get out of that field. So sincerely, I may not be able to cover everything, but what I've tried to do here is just to put up some basic illustrations of what are the critical elements and factors you have to put in place. You have to bear in mind when you're trying to manage a brownfield. Imagine, for instance, you have a field that just has about most people look out for reserves of 50 million barrels, 40 million barrels, and the rest of them. Imagine if it has a reserve of about 10 million barrels or 8 million barrels, or you have a reservoir that has a reserve of about, let me say, 2 million barrels. What do you do to those kind of reservoirs, or even 1 million barrels? That is the essence of this presentation. We're looking out for, okay, how are we able to even tap for small opportunities, not the very big ones. You can have the big ones that have been drained significantly, but for the remaining opportunities that are here, hidden here and there, how are we able to recover it? And that's the essence of this presentation. So in the course of this presentation, I'll be taking us through the following outline. So first, we'll talk about the factors to consider in brownfield development. We'll talk about basic static and dynamic models, which we are all familiar with. We'll talk about pre-production and post-production contact analysis. We'll talk about the dynamics flow evaluation to identify, drillable targets. We'll talk about the impact of intra-reservoir shale, in a horizontal well, in terms of the performance of the well. We'll talk about fluid contact equilibration, because many times we'll see, the impact of some of these things that you've left a well for some years without touching it. What impact does it have when you go back to that well? We'll talk about that. Then we'll talk about a few results that I'll share. Then finally, conclusion on a general statement. So for factors to be considered, the first is when you have an old well, old field, you want to start looking out for, okay, are there existing idle wells in that field? When I mean idle wells are wells that are not longer producing. So if, for instance, I come to a field and I have, let me say, a very old field, I have like 30 wells or 40 wells. In that field, I begin to ask myself, out of these 30 wells or 40 wells, how many of them are no longer producing? Do I have like 5 or 6 or 7 that are no longer producing? If they do, those are my good, targets. What do I do is I just note those wells down. Then once I note those wells, the next thing I begin to look out for then is what are the remaining opportunities I have in my entire field. So for instance, what that means is that I have my static, I would have built on my static model, then also run my simulation history match. And from my simulation, at least I'll begin to know, okay, what is the current contact, the post-production contact? If I slam that, what is the remaining opportunities from the end of histories? So by the time, for instance, in a field, I have like 10 reservoirs, I try and check each of them, all the remaining opportunities. Some of them might be scattered. In a reservoir, you can have like 2 or 3. In some other, you might have only one. So when I look at all those opportunities, I can also rank them in terms of volume. Out of these opportunities, which one do I want to produce? Definitely, you can't produce everything at the same time. But as a marginal company, you want to make significant value by producing one that it can be. You don't want to produce something that it's giving you 200 barrels. But if something can give you about 1,000 barrels or thereabout or above that, you have, at least if you have a margin that you're working with, you use that to rank those opportunities. Then the next other thing to look out for is you need to build an uncertainty register. Uncertainty register is helping you to identify what are the entire opportunities you have in the field, then what uncertainties are around those opportunities, even away. For instance, if you have a reservoir that has only seen an oil down to, no matter how small it is, if it is an oil down to, there's still an uncertainty beyond it. But definitely, if you're going to make your planning, you plan with that oil down to. That is the best option to do, because if you go ahead and go and do all these forecasts such that you try and add half-pay thickness and all of that, to me, I don't think that's the best approach. The best approach is to plan with the oil down to. Then from that oil down to, you begin to factor in the uncertainty in the oil down to. That means beyond this contact, there's going to be uncertainty. So we'll be looking at that in the course of this presentation. What do you then do? Do I need to now plan a well? If I'm planning any well, such that it is able to address those uncertainties. Sometimes the uncertainty might even be structure. You might have one structural high that is jumping somewhere, and you feel, oh, this structural high, is it really there? Because there's no well that have actually penetrated it. That structural high, as far as no well, there's no well control there. Especially if it is small, it's still an uncertainty that you need to test. It's only when a well has tested there, because sometimes you have issues with velocity model, even as much as you might build so many of them, even in terms of even seismic artifacts. You want to use a well to address those uncertainties. So a number of uncertainties, I have a list of uncertainties that I will share here that we'll get to look at, and what kind of examples to look out for from structure, from contact, and also in terms of dynamics. Then the other part is we talk about concept selection. So basically for concept selection is you've looked at all these opportunities. How best do I develop it? There are some opportunities that the only way you can actually use an existing well to do a reperforation exercise. And in that one, you get significant production. While there are some, you might discover that there is one idle well that has produced for a very long time, but that have been left, untouched. What that means that maybe the well produced and with a very high BS and W, then after a while, the well quits. But if you go back there, you see that there might be possibility that there is being an equilibration. That same well, when you go back in that same well, you'll be able to produce significant volume from there because of maybe it's been produced initially at a very high choke rate. So those are some of the things we'll be looking out for here. Then the other part is wellhead and surface location. If you want to plan for for a brownfield, you need to check your wellheads. For instance, if you're going to plan a new well, is it better off I make use of an existing well and what I sidetrack from that well? And for instance, for many of us who operate on the land, no matter in as much as you're operating in the Niger Delta on land, you have to always pay to acquire those land. Even if you move 1 kilometer away, the land you've not purchased, you have to still pay for it. And sometimes it requires a lot of logistics engagement with the community because you're trying to put the wellhead there. That's the essence of that land. But if you have a wellhead location already or an existing slot, you don't need to pay for that land anymore. What you just need is just continue with your normal community engagement and activity that you've been planning for them. But if you require to shift location to a different location in that region, let me call it, let me say Lagos, for instance, you want to shift, your wellhead is supposed to be in Lagos Island, in Victoria Island. Now you've discovered that, okay, there is another wellhead I can put in Ikoyi. For you to go to Ikoyi and go and put your wellhead there, you're going to pay for that land. So some of these things also come of the cost that you have to, and not just land, you also talk about the facility, the pipeline you're going to lay from Ikoyi all the way to Victoria Island. So those are some of the things you look out for. Is there a need of using, is there a possibility of using an existing wellhead location or slot? Then the other one talks about facility. I've talked about that. Then we talk about field development plan. So in whatever you're developing, in whatever brownfield you're operating on, you also want to be sure that whatever opportunities you're trying to drain, that they're actually in the FDP plan. If they're not in the field development plan initially, then you might need to prepare an addendum before you go ahead and plan a well, to drill that. Even if you're planning, you need that addendum needs to be approved by the regulator. So these are some proprietary things that needs to be done as you go through a brownfield development. So now the very first thing to look out for is idle wells. This is a typical example. One thing I look out for in this case is the very first question I ask is, are there available wells that are no longer producing but accessible? So if you look here, I try to use an annotation, the black annotation you're seeing there. So the black ones means currently idle well perforations that are no longer producing. Then while the white means currently well perforations that are still producing. Currently white perforations that are still producing. So now the next question now is, can they be utilized by an intervention activity that will require a perforation or zone change? Those are some of the things like the thoughts to bring to bear. Then the other one is, how optimal are they with regards to the remaining opportunities? So I now put a question here. So for instance, you have D4, D5, and E6. I put a question on red. How best can you produce D4, D5, and E6 oil opportunities? So if you see D4, D4 is actually up here. What that means is that no well has produced D4 in as much as a well passed through it. You also have D5. Then you have E6. So if you're to be me, I would just want maybe one person in the room to just you can actually, I believe everyone has access to talk. You can just raise your hand and make comments. If you're to develop D4, D5, and D6 reservoir opportunities, how would you develop these opportunities? Anyone can answer, please.
Please, you can unmute yourself and answer. Julius, please, can you answer?
Okay, good morning, everyone. Dr. David, good morning. And Professor Amigun,
Yeah, morning.
my lecturer, good morning, sir. Okay, so for me, going by the um, lay down rule by the regulatory, you produce bottoms up. So I will go I will re-enter well B because it appears that D500 is optimal in well B. So I will perforate D500 on a long string and then D400 on a short string. So the D400 is marginal, looking at the structure there. So for the E600, because where C is already producing from that uh, zone, I want to believe. So um, is either I going back for um, extended perforation, either by coming a bit up, hoping that we've not reached the where the hydrocarbon column height is still significant, that I can still have room to perforate at the crest of that structure. So I think that would be a possible approach that I will go with. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot, Julius. Does any other person have a contrary opinion before I come in? Okay, let me just go on straight then. Hello,
I think
sorry.
that
Okay, I think I muted. Yeah, mistakenly. Okay, so if I'm going to target D4 and D5 opportunity, one of the key things I look out for is what existing well, as I talked about, which of this existing well can I reuse? And if you look at it from here, there's an idle well here. Well B is an idle well. So the plan is I'm going to re-enter well B and try to use well B, put my short string very well on D4 and my long string on D5. However, now there's a caveat. You also need to now check what kind of, you need to do a CBL acquisition to be sure that the CBL, the cement behind that casing on where the D4 and D5 is actually very good. Or if you have an existing CBL data, then fine, you can actually make use of that. But if, for instance, the CBL you have was actually inherited, it is advisable that you just go in, you can use Wireline to run a CBL to actually identify what kind of cement do you have there before you go ahead and perforate, do that zone change on D5 and D4. And in that case, for the E6000, quite all right, you've been producing from well C. And if you look at it, you notice that one of the strings, so there are two strings, you have a short string and a long string. So the long string is actually no longer producing, that's a deeper string. So if I can actually reuse it, you also need to now check, okay, what was the well completion strategy of this existing well C? Because sometimes when you've completed the well, depending on how they've arranged the well packers and all that, they might completely, close out a particular zone. But if I still have access to the E6000, then what I would just do is just to do a zone change, move my perforation from where it is currently at E9000 to E6000 on well C. So in all of this, it's always good. You're going to check first the opportunity, find and good if identify that opportunity. You also have to now go back and check what is the completion strategy of that particular well. With the way the well has been completed, will it allow you to reuse it? And if it will allow you to reuse it, you will now go ahead also and check in terms of the CBL, the cement bond lock there. because that particular opportunity was not planned for that well. Hope hope there's there's enough cement, there's a good cement behind the casing, such that if you reperforate, you won't have fluid moving across the reservoirs behind the casing all the way entering the reservoir. So those are one of the things to check. So here I put the answer as a planetary perforation on well B, just as Julius has said, to target D4 on short string and D5 on long string. And I've also mentioned that you also have to take the completion strategy, initial completion strategy, and also check the CBL on that well before you go ahead and reperforate. Then the other one talks about applying a reperforation on well C to target E6000 on long string. And in each case, you always check the completion strategy for that well, initial completion strategy. Okay, so I go to the next slide. All right, so another question now comes to mind. I'm still going with my idle wells. I look for another question. Are there available wells that are no longer producing but accessible? That question still remains. Then can they be utilized for new drilling opportunities? Let's say all the wells I have now, I've used them to assess all the existing opportunities that I have. Now I see in a kind of a step out drilling opportunity that I could actually do, that is a bit far off. Perhaps a well might have confirmed it or not. That's a different case entirely. But if you look at where the D7000 and the D8000, D7000 and the D8000 is, you begin to ask yourself the question, how do I optimally place a well to target D7 and D8000? How best can you produce D7 and D8000? And realize that one of the best approach to actually produce this is to plan a sidetrack from well A. And the reason for this is that when you plan a sidetrack from well A, remember, you're not going to be purchasing or paying for wellhead location in terms of where you have to drill from. There's existing wellhead slots. And also, there's also high chances that you will not be drilling from a shallow depth. Perhaps you might be drilling from about 5,000 feet or 6,000 feet to target an opportunity that's about 8,000 or 9,000 feet. So in that case, you've saved the cost of drilling 6,000 feet or 5,000 feet of interval. So in that case, all that is doing to you is that you're using, a small amount of money to actually recover what you would have recovered by drilling a new well. One other thing you also consider also is, as you're using this well as well, what other opportunities or uncertainties can the well also help you to address? So those are the essence of utilizing all the idle wells as much as possible. Then these are some of the uncertainties that one have to look out for when you're planning your wells in a brownfield. Also, this also applies to even a greenfield, but for brownfield specifically, there's significant uncertainties that you're trying to close as much as possible because you understand the field to a very great extent. One is fluid contact. So you have fluid contact. So if you look at the diagram D there, you notice that the figure D, that this is a fluid contact showing an oil down to. And this oil down to, what that means is that this well or in this field, the original contact has not been seen. So if an original contact has not been seen, and let me say this well, this opportunity is actually a small opportunity, it will be actually, or no well has produced from it. It will be good to actually use a well, a step out well, to actually test, okay, if I go further away from where all these wells are seen, well 1 and well 2, could it also be that this oil actually continues and it could actually be bigger than what it currently is? That is one scenario to paint. In that case, if it is bigger, it is a very good thing for the company. That means we still have enough. Imagine this reservoir, for instance, this is about 30 feet or over 30 feet of oil pay. Imagine if you have that 30 feet of oil pay that is significantly, deeper. That shows that you're going to have significant volume in that reservoir. So as much as possible, you want to see how your well will be able to address that uncertainty. So it can occur both for gas or for oil. And sometimes it could even be the gas oil contact that might be the uncertainty where you have gas down to. So those are some of the things to bear in mind. The other one is structural high that have not been tested. So if you look at the diagram C, that's the figure C, you notice that, okay, if for instance I have a well there and away from the well, I'm having this structure. from different velocity models. One is telling me that my structure is going up there and all. It is also good to see, okay, is there a possibility that any well I'm planning, any of my recent well, could actually help me to test this structure? And if it tests the structure, there could be a possibility that, oh, that structure might be containing oil and significant portion of hydrocarbon. So the reason for testing some of those structures, you might test them and not develop them immediately, but you might test them to later reuse another well to develop them. Also, if you come to structure, also if you look at the figure A, something similar appears also appears there too. So imagine what you have well 1, well 2, and well 3 in figure A. If, for instance, you've calculated your hydrocarbon volume using that red line, what you're going to be having lesser hydrocarbon volume than what is actually in place. Because what you've had there is that in well 2, you've had a clear field channel that has cut off a part of the reservoir. So that Clayfield channel that is cutting off a part of the reservoir does not mean the Clayfield channel is all the way all around. But if you have used your red line to just take it all the way, that is actually it's okay to be pessimistic, but in a way, it is also good if you have the opportunity of going a bit and testing. So if you see that blue structural height there, you might just want to test it and see, okay, could there be a possibility that if I come here, I might actually find, a significant high, which would be different from what this low, this well 2 has seen. So that is some of the things you try to manage when you're looking at brownfield for structures. Then the other part you talk about is reservoirs with poorer quality. So if, for instance, your reservoir has a very poor quality in a particular from wells, it's also good to say, okay, if I go towards a different direction, could it be possible that the reservoir could have better quality? Because sincerely, if your reservoir has poor quality, the chances are low that you will have significant production from them. Yes. The poorer your reservoir, the poorer you can recover from it, and even the volume and everything will drop. But if, for instance, you now get to move to a different step out location and you find out that the quality of the sands there, the quality of the reservoirs there are better off, you just get to realize that if I had known, by the time I placed my well here to address this uncertainty, I would have even gotten a better, a better production from this particular reservoir. So all these uncertainties are one of the things that need to be factored in when you're trying to manage your brownfield, because the essence is you're trying to see, okay, how much can I recover? You can actually manage a brownfield for as long as 5-10 years in some cases, or even beyond that, if you're able to effectively integrate all the uncertainties you have, and such that in your planning phases, both for short-term oil gain or long-term gains, you're actually trying to say, okay, what uncertainties am I mitigating with the existing wells that I have? Are there opportunities like down to contacts that have not been tested that I need to go ahead and reconfirm those contacts? Then the other part also is if, for instance, where I have fluid uncertainties, there are some cases where your logs might not really give you a clear indication. You can have a log that still lets you know you're not sure that it is oil or gas. In that case, you might want to go down there and collect a downhole sample. If for any reason you're not applying anywhere close to that, you try and appraise that. And if for any reason it turns out positive that is oil, it is actually added to your reserve. At least your reserve would have increased from there. So these are some of the uncertainties that one has to consider when you are planning your well and when you're trying to harness your opportunities in the brownfield. So the other one you just look at basic static and dynamic modeling. So the approach here is not just to teach us static or dynamic modeling, because I'm sure many of us know what a static model is and a dynamic model is. But the plan is, how do you integrate this into a brownfield and get result from it? How much value can you get, from integrating this data? So here we have a static model that I've built for a reservoir. I call it D reservoir. I have my Feshies, my Feshies model, which I did from Little Feshies, and you have effective porosity. Usually your Feshies should have been biased to an EOD model. Then you have your effective porosity, permeability, and volume of shale. So after you've done all of this, with your saturation, you hand them over to the reservoir engineer to do their history match and simulation. So from this, now we have a pre-production and post-production contact. So if you look at the left map, you have the oil zone and the swept zone. The swept zone means that region has been produced. So, and the oil zone is like the remaining. So if you look at the one on the left, that one is using just map alone. You're just posting the contact on map. But if you look at the one on the right, it is based on a dynamic model. So now if I have a dynamic model on the right that is showing this kind of stuff, and my interest is actually to target oil, I begin to look at, okay, in this dynamic model, with this remaining opportunity of my post-production, where can I possibly place my well? So if I look at it, so now we'll be able to, zone out some targets. I will say, okay, we have target 1, target 2, target 3. Now, out of this target 2, target 1, 2, and 3, I begin to also look out. There are two ways you can do this. You can decide to get the average saturation. This one is just looking at the saturation from the top. You can get the average saturation from this reservoir and actually make use of it, or you take your saturation by slices. You put your dynamic saturation by slices, such that you go from one level to a deeper level to a much deeper level and see how much opportunities you have remaining there. In that case, you can now use that to rank your opportunities and say, okay, if I look at these opportunities, where do I likely want to place my well? So if you look at the cross section below, you have a pre-production contact also and a post-production contact, showing that in the pre-production contact you have what? A stable, that's an initial condition. Sorry, can someone mute that person? Yeah, so at such that in the initial condition, you have a stable contact, while as you move to the post-production, you discover that what? Your contact, varies and is relatively shallower. And in some cases, you see that the contact has not equilibrated. So contacts are varied. They vary based on different the production with the production radius of each well. So if you look at the well now, for instance, if you look at the very top map, you see that a lot of wells have been drilled here already. You have so many wells, horizontal wells in each angle. So as each of them are draining the wells, they have their radius of influence that they can produce from. So as much as possible, as this is producing, the other one is also producing. So the contact is not totally moving at the same, at the same level as you go up. So this is also looking at the end of history. So now we'll try to take it on layer by layer cases. And we'll also try to put, okay, all the opportunities that we'll try to highlight from the top. And what you notice is that as you go from layer 1 down to layer 6, you realize that the remaining opportunities only get you to the extreme eastern portion of the opportunity of the yellows and the extreme western portion. So if, for instance, I want to plan my opportunity or I want to focus where I'm going to plan my next well, definitely I'll be going towards either of these two options. And I can decide to rank it. Okay, my first well definitely might go to the one on the extreme right, while my second well later on might go to the one on the extreme left. But in each case, as I said, we always try to look for how we can address uncertainties with these wells. So here we've been able to now plan, these horizontal wells. So you have horizontal wells, you target an horizontal wells, one to actually graze towards the crest, and that's to graze towards the crest, towards the opportunity you found towards the southwestern portion. And you also plan another well wide to graze towards the east, towards the oil section. So in each case, what you're trying to do is that you've already checked your dynamic model, you've checked your contact. In as much as you also have this, remember, you also have to drill a pilot well. But this one is planned based on the dynamic model. And you always have to superimpose this also on the seismic to actually see how it varies, to be sure that the structure is not, dipping sharply around that axis. Another thing to consider also for a brownfield development is look at inter-reservoir shale correlation. So there are some shales that are naturally low impact, and there are some shales that are actually high impact. So if you look at this diagram, for instance, you can see in the gas contact, you have that low impact shale. That means this shale is not very extensive. The possibility of communication fluid across the shale is actually very high. Then you have another one which I call the high impact shale. Why? This one is very extensive. You can imagine a shale that is almost 5 kilometers long. So in that case, the chances are high that the shale there might serve to impede communication between the contact above and the contact below. And what that means is that you notice that the gas and the oil contact might not totally, be moving at tandem at some points. So this is an illustration of what that means. So imagine you have your well here and you have your gas. If you look at the pre-production contact, everything looks stable. Why? You see your intra-reservoir shale that is continuous. It went all the way down the structure. Fine and good, you've planned your well. But now you begin to imagine what is going to happen to this well in the post-production stage. By the time I begin to produce this well, why? Based on where my hill is, if you look at it, the gas has a preferential direction of expansion. So that gas will likely expand towards the direction where it is not able to find any blockade. So for instance, it will rarely pass through a shale, but if it finds its way grazing through the structure going downwards, then it's going to find that way as a best point of movement. So in that case, once you're able to find gas coming in here, what happens? This gas is going to kill your well. The chances are very high that the gas is going to kill your well. However, if the gas is coming from the opposite direction, the gas, maybe say the gas is coming from the toe of the well, the gas can actually help to even lighten the crude, such that it will help to improve your performance. But as much as possible, it's actually helping us to understand that even when you're planning your well, you also want to be, put everything into consideration, especially for horizontal wells. As I'm placing my wells, are there possibility of inter-reservoir shale? How continuous are those shale? And what impact do they have to the dynamic behavior of the fluid? Then the other one we're talking about the water down. Also in this case, because you're already getting gas, in most cases, people try to use, you now begin to have a higher drawdown. You're trying to see if you can pull, because if you don't pull at a higher drawdown, you might not be able to get the oil. Now, and as you're trying to pull at a higher drawdown, water is coming as well. Meanwhile, if you had planned it very well, such that you're just grazing inside the oil, what is going to happen is as you're pulling, no matter how, even with a very low drawdown, you just be producing light oil alone. But if you actually planned your well this way, the chances are high that if you try to produce on a high drawdown, what happens is that you begin to have gas coming in very quickly, because gas already has its preferential part at the top of that shale grazing across, and you also have water trying to find its way up there. So this is a kind of recommended well path in a kind of scenario where you have such thing. So I have my pre-production contacts, and what happens? So in my pre-production contact, I already realized that, oh, there's likely to be a shale, and across this shale, the chances are high that my gas might expand towards that preferential direction. So if my gas is going to expand that as much as possible, I want to avoid my toe of my well being on that location. So what I do in that case is that as much as possible, I try to direct my well such that even if I have a produce at a very low drawdown, I'll have more of my oil coming in than before the gas comes. And even if the gas comes, it will take a while before the gas will have significant impact on the production of the well. Then this is also a concept that is also very important in brownfields. Why? Because for brownfields, you produce so much from the reservoir. Now, at a point, we've seen many cases where, imagine, for instance, you're producing a reservoir, and the reservoir is producing about 4,000 barrels of oil, 5,000 barrels, very high rates. And you keep, in fact, as you're choking up, the thing is giving you high recovery as you're choking up. So at the time, you realize that all of a sudden, you just have water coming in at a very fast rate. So if you have such a scenario, it is going to take a lot of time before you can be able to get that well back. So even if you try to do everything to swab it, a lot of that well might not come up. But however, if you close that well for some years, maybe about 3 years or 4 years, we've seen cases where by the time you go back to that well, just by producing it on a low rate, maybe you do a reperforation at the shallower level of that oil, you realize that you're going to produce for a sustained rate, maybe not the earlier 4,000 or 5,000 barrels that you're initially producing, but rather you begin to make something like 1,500 barrels from that same well. So we've seen cases like that. In fact, we've seen a case where people will even try to see how we can remove the surface facilities, the pipelines and everything, only for the simulation to be run, again, and they notice, oh, there is possibility. By the time you even go back there and look at the pressure, there's also pressure coming in from here. That means there's a level of equilibration that have actually happened on this reservoir, that this reservoir that initially was not producing, because you produced at a very high choke rate and almost killed the well. Now you can actually go back and reproduce that well at a low rate, and you still make economic, value from that same well. So in that case, it doesn't even require you to have a new well to plan. You can actually make use of that existing well to actually produce from it. Then the other one talks about the location of wellheads, facility, and FDP. So as I mentioned earlier on, that it is cheaper for you to use an existing wellhead when you're planning your development in a brownfield. Why? Because you don't have to pay for the acquisition of land or slots. You just have to go ahead and just a step out from your existing well location if you have a slot already and drill from. But if you have an existing well, maybe that well is an idle well, it's no longer producing. You tried all the opportunities, there's no opportunity along that well. It is okay for you to go back to that same well, use it to re-enter, and actually will sidetrack to the opportunity where you want to go to. So that removes the cost of you trying to, acquire land and also trying to engage the community, because acquiring land and also paying so many community fees in order for you to actually have access to that land. So as much as possible, you're trying to take advantage of that opportunity of using the idle wells to access that opportunity. Then the other one, he talked about even the existing pipeline, because when you have an existing wellhead, you already have pipeline around, connected. But if you go to a different location where you have to acquire land and all of that, you realize that you have to pay. You will have to pay to acquire those land. And after that, you have to now lay pipeline from that new location now to wherever your flow station is. You have to lay pipeline. I don't know how much it is, but I know 1 kilometer of pipeline is almost about $2 million or 1.5, depending on the location. But if you look at that, you're able to save costs because your field is already, a brown field. As much as possible, you're able to save costs and still get significant value from someone that will see almost similar to going to drill a fresh well. Then the other one is a shared facility. It reduces your cost of your OPEX. So if, for instance, you have your facilities around, you can sharing those facilities help you to reduce your OPEX. Imagine, for instance, you go on ahead to now build a new flow station or trying to build a gas plant and all of that. But if you have an existing facility, what that does for you is that it helps you to cut that off. So you just try, okay, what is the nearest facility I can tie this to? And I'll produce from it. Or if I'm looking for a place where I'm trying to source gas injection to actually help lighten up my crude, where is the nearest facility I can actually source that instead of building a new gas plant? So some of those things have significant impact on your economics. And sometimes the essence of managing a brownfield is that you're trying to use very minor costs and you're still trying to get significant recovery and gain, similar to what you will get when you're trying to drill a fresh well. Then the other one is you talk about every new well or reperforation is expected to be shown in the FDP. So if, for instance, you have your FDP already, if you're targeting any opportunity, it has to be in the FDP. If, for instance, now you're trying to target that D5 opportunity and in the FDP, they've not captured it, or for some reason a well is not seeing that D5, you have to go and write an addendum because the DPR the regulator has to approve of it for you to actually be able to, to go and develop it. Even though they want it, Nigeria wants crude, wants the country needs money, but as much as possible, there are regulations and there are ways of doing some of these things. So you don't just go ahead and plan a well to target it. You need to write an addendum to an FDP because the initial FDP you had did not cover that reservoir. Then another opportunity is or earlier solution, which I wrote as the last point there, is it is always good when you're trying to develop your field, even when you're writing an addendum, as much as possible. That's why it's good to highlight all your uncertainties, add all the remaining opportunities you have, so that you don't have to keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, because sometimes you're so tired with so many activities that you don't have time to start writing addendum. So, but if you're able to do this at once, you know that chapter is closed. What is left for you is just to go ahead and develop that opportunity. So, as much as possible, location of wellhead, it's always good to reuse existing wellhead location. If you can, try and reuse it. It removes that cost for you. Then facility, if there are nearby facilities, try and see how much you can actually utilize from it and make value from it. And also for your FDP. For instance, for the facility now, I heard there's a gas gathering facility that's been built in the offshore region, and I think it's built by 2 companies. So those are some of these facilities that there are a lot of companies in the offshore region, especially around the shallow waters, that have enough stranded gas opportunities, many of them, and they've not produced these gas opportunities. And the reason is because they don't have facilities to actually access or to actually produce those gas into. So, but now when you have such a facility, a gas gathering facility, it is for you, it is cheaper for you to just pay their handling cost and just, uh, produce into their own facility, and from there make your sales. So that way you see that in a way you try to manage your economics and as well trying to get significant value from your field. So in conclusion, the essence of this presentation is just to give us a brief highlight of how brownfields are better managed with very or minor costs as compared to planning new wells, planning significant development for a field. But at a very significant minimal cost, you realize that you're able to spend little and get similar value as someone that is going to build new facility and plants. And also all this requires for you the integration of all the data you have from seismic, static models, dynamic models, wells, your pressure data, production history, completions, and even the facilities. You're trying to combine everything. See, okay, by integration of this data I have, how much how much value can I get out of it? What are the remaining opportunities? Am I able to utilize all these stuff to get significant value? Then also, it's also good to make use of existing wells before thinking about planning any new well in a brownfield. Before you think about planning, you look at, okay, for the opportunities I've identified, are there ways I can use my existing wells, maybe the idle wells? Sometimes you could have two strings, maybe a short string and a long string, and your long string is actually free, but your short string is busy. You can use that long string and see how you can reassess that opportunity. But sometimes you also have to be also careful, because we've seen cases where you're trying to see how you can access a deeper opportunities than even the one you're producing from the shorter one. Before you know it, you have an issue with that one, and that well quits producing, or the well is junked. So as much as possible, we want to be sure that the well integrity and everything in managing the project is actually put in place. In fact, as much as possible, you want to be sure that the planning of even the reperforation exercise is well planned, such that it doesn't affect the existing producing wells. And if it's going to affect it, you begin to look at, okay, what the economic impact? Is it that from here I'm going to get significant volume as compared to what I'm actually producing from the other well? And the other one talks about where there are new wells to a plant. If you're even planning new wells or sidetrack, you also begin to look at what uncertainties would these sidetrack opportunities help me to identify. Because as much as possible, as I said, you can actually manage a brownfield for additional 10 years, additional 5 years. And people will be shocked how you're able to manage that. But because you've been able to integrate all the minor data that many people would have ignored and said they are not necessary, or uncertainties that many people out of their personal cases, because we've seen cases in this industry where people, if you don't buy into the idea, they just remove it. But if you're able to integrate everything you have, you can see cases whereby even no matter how minor the opportunity is, you're able to make significant value from it. Then in each case, no matter how you plan, whatever you plan or whatever opportunities you're trying to address, be sure you also try to integrate economics into it. In terms of the economics, are you sure if, for instance, I put in $5 million to get this opportunity, is it going to be better off than me putting $10 million to develop these opportunities? If I'm trying to recover, imagine for instance, a simple instance, I'm trying to recover 1 million barrels from the subsurface. And I know, okay, from this 1 million barrels, I could do an intervention opportunity and it just cost me $500,000. And I would, successfully with $500,000, I'm going to recover this well and get it into production. Will you prefer to spend that $500,000 than to go and spend $20 million or 30 or $40 million to drill a well and still get that same $1 million, 1 million barrels? You see that the essence of it is you're trying to see how much can I get if I just go and do a perforation exercise and get value, or if I do a sidetrack option where initially if I'm supposed to drill a well of $25 million, now I'm spending maybe $12 million to do that well because it's a sidetrack option. So in that case, the cost of acquiring the land is gone. The cost of the well parts from the shallower region, the drilling cost from the shallower region, let me say the first 5,000 feet, is also gone, and I'm able to make significant savings and even also address some uncertainties from there. So that's the essence of managing the brownfield, using all the existing opportunities, using the existing wells, and also integrating them with all the uncertainties that you have. So in the essence of this, there are opportunities that has to be planned both for near term, for mid term, and for long term. Because sincerely, in many cases, you can't produce all the opportunities at once. Why? You might realize that it even costs you more. So that's why the economics is there. It might cost you more to even produce everything. And you will realize also that you have poorly manage your reservoir. So you need to be sure that you have a proper reservoir management approach so that your reservoir is able to produce. Imagine, for instance, you have 10 million barrels in there and your plan is to recover, let me say, 4 million barrels. And you use a poor reservoir management approach, and just because you want to quickly produce everything, and you're only able to recover 1.5 or 1.8 million barrels, you discover that about 2 point something million barrels there have been left untouched, unaccessible, because you've used a poor management approach because you want to produce everything at once. So there are a lot of things I want to put into perspective, but as much as possible, always target proper reservoir management approach and your economics in all the planning phase of your development. Thank you very much. I think that comes to the end of my presentation. So I mean, I'll take questions before the YP team can ask their own question.
All right. I don't know if you can hear me. Hello.
Yes, I can.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Anomnese. I mean, it's always a delight to listen to you share from your wealth of experience and knowledge. So as Dr. Anamnesia has said, it'll be time for questions. So I see some hands up already. I think we can go straight up into it. Sorry, my name is Sheon Ogundipe. I know Siloko was the one who started the introduction. He's the publicity secretary, and I am the head of technical committee for the Nape YP. So in this particular order, I know Ifeanyi would go first, you'd unmute, then Athoja would unmute, and then Nkechi would unmute. So Ifeanyi, I think you can unmute and then ask your questions.
Okay, thank you, Chew. Thank you, Dr. David, for the wonderful presentation. I learned a lot. I also believe that I hope that you will share the slide with us as well. And also for further engagement, you can reach out. But the one question I want to ask is, in a situation where you have done all this, you have shared with us, is that a case where you have no choice than to plan for new well? Do you mind sharing from your experience?
Okay, yeah. So there are cases like that where you've done everything you can. So that's why I mentioned first is you've looked at the idle wells, and that means you've checked the idle wells. One, either they are not reusable or they are not optimal. So if, for instance, I have an idle well and the well is not optimal, what's the essence of me using it? Because in each case, I must also simulate what the performance of that well is. So if, for instance, I'm trying to use an idle well to produce a particular reservoir, and I notice, okay, this idle well, if I use it based on where the position of the well, on how much, there's what you call Douglas-Key's verity. There's how much you can actually deviate your wells that will to allow it to be drillable, such that if I'm able to now check that, okay, for instance, let me say the idle well is going to help me produce 500,000 barrels. But if I do a new well and place it very well, it's going to help me produce about 2 million barrels or 3 million barrels recoverable. I would rather prefer to go drill a new well than using an idle well, because the reality is that the new well have more chances of even helping you to address uncertainties. So from that new well, the only thing I begin to factor in is what other uncertainties can I address? And also, as I'm planning this well, are there other possibilities that, okay, are there opportunities that are shallower or deeper that if I go with this new well, I could actually test them, or I could even put some behind sleeve, such that later on in the life of the well, as this one is actually quitting, actually go back there and reperforate and produce from there. So it all depends on what the performance is and if the idle wells is reusable. If it is not reusable, you can't do anything than to plan a new well. But just know that it comes with a cost and it comes with a lot of planning. But if the idle well can't give you as much as I talk, as much as I said, the significant recoverable value that you need in terms of the production performance, then you need to see how can you make use of the new well and get significant value from. So it all boils down to the recovery, what you can recover, and how much uncertainties you can address with the new well. So if you can address more uncertainties and you can recover more volume, then go for your new well. Yeah, so that's it.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. OJ Athoja, you can unmute and then ask your question. Are you there? All right. Okay. So go on.
Yes, I'm here. Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you, Dr. David. Yeah, it's always a pleasure to listen to you. Yeah, each time you are always pouring a repository that kind of address part of the questions that I wanted to ask. So that okay, yeah. From the last ask question. So I think the next thing I just wanted to comment on is like the kind of mediation we have with large gas caps. Sometimes because of the regulations on gas flaring, and maybe most of these brown feed we actually to gas. You understand? So it's a kind of challenge. Do you have any comment on that?
Sorry, I didn't get the last statement. Can you just repeat, please? Your voice was breaking. I don't know if it's my network.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so
Just repeat.
actually, yes. So okay, so I just wanted you to comment on the limitation posed by maybe regulation on gas flaring and maybe absence of gas handling facilities, or maybe most of these brown fields, they are not actually designed to handle gas production, and you have some reservoirs or some fields that are largely gas. Then you have oil that have not been produced from such reservoirs. So how do you actually manage all this to be able to, extend the field life using those reservoirs? Like we have a very big gas cap, very small oil, maybe 5 to 10 meters of oil.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So I understand that aspect. So sometimes you can have cases where you have significant gas and maybe you don't have the facility for it. That is why I talked about where you have people building facilities, trying to see if you can use a nearby facility. Because the reality is that we have to follow the regulators. They want us to reduce flaring, but you need to look out for which companies are closer to you that you can actually tie to their gas facilities, their gas plants. You check around you. Is there any company around? And also another opportunity is you also check out, okay, the gas I even have, can I reuse them? So if it is something I can reuse for my gas leaf mandrels, or for my gas injection, at least you're going to still get value from it. So there are ways you try to see, okay, the gas I have, can I reuse it? Or the gas I have, is there a way I could actually, make use of facilities of nearby companies such that you just pay handling charge and you still get significant value from it. But significantly, you can't go ahead and flare a very high. There are limits of how much you can flare. So you don't want to
It's
go
a
and
very
flare significant volume of gas out there. Yeah, significant volume. But as much as possible, try and see how to utilize if there are nearby facilities. Or another thing companies can do is that you can come together as a consortium. So if, for instance, you have 2 or 3 companies that have significant stranded gas, that you still need to produce, because gas, you also have to say there's a market for gas. You just have to look for how to assess the market. You can actually come together and actually build a gas facility. 2, 3, or 4 companies can come together and do that, form a consortium and build that gas facility and see how they can harness the production from that gas.
Okay, yeah, thank you
that's
very
it
much.
from me, Jerry. Yeah, thank you. Welcome.
All right, thanks for that. I think Nkechi, can you unmute and then ask your question?
Okay, thanks, Sharon. Thank you so much, Dr. David, for the presentation. It was quite extensive. For me, I have 3 questions. So at the beginning, you talked about using a short and long string. I don't know if you can really explain what you mean by that. I think it's an engineering thing. I don't know what it is. So to really have a mental picture of what you were saying, to go to the I think D2, D3, E6 reservoirs, talked about using a short and long string. I really want to get that, what you mean by that. Then the second one is just to have like a mental picture. What's the timeline of carrying out this brownfield development process? That is minus the field part. I mean the research work. What's like the timeline? Is like 3 months, 6 months, just for a mental picture. Then my last question is, I really got lost when you were explaining the concept of the toe and heel, the coning. So don't be angry. I don't know if you can go back there just to do a little bit of justice to it, because I got lost at that moment. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So for the first one, you talked about the short and the long string. So the short and long string means, for instance, I have 2 reservoirs that I want to target. I call one reservoir A and I call the other reservoir B. Now reservoir B is deeper, reservoir A is shallower. If I want to produce these 2 reservoirs at the same time, I cannot just use one string, go in there and do a commingling. Commingling means using one string and I'll just shoot my perforation and I begin to produce from those 2 reservoirs. It is not acceptable under the regulation, under DPR regulation. Even globally, most times it's not acceptable, except if it's a stack of sand. So now, for you to now respect the DPR regulation and the normal regulatory process, what you have to do now, you go there with 2 strings. When I mean 2 strings, 2 tubing. So I set 2 tubing. One of the tubing is going to get down to the deeper reservoir, the B reservoir. The other tubing is going to be shallower, it's going to be in the A reservoir. So when I'm producing, I'll use packers to separate these 2 tubing production intervals. So I'm going to be producing I can produce simultaneously. I can shut off one and I can open the other one. I can produce simultaneously from way and from reservoir A and reservoir B. So that's what I mean long string and the short string. It's just about the tubing. It just means I have two tubings in my well, and from that two tubings, I'm able to produce from a shallower interval and also use another tubing to produce from a deeper interval. So in the same case, if I'm trying to reperforate, I have to plan, okay, do I want to use a shallow tubing, the shallow tubing, or the deeper tubing to actually produce that reservoir? So that's for tubing. Then the second one, we talked about the timeline for brownfield development. So the timeline sincerely varies, because if you want to do, what I call it, a significant job, it can take you up to 2 years. Significant, if you want to do it. So it depends on the number of team you have. If you have significant number of team, then if you have significant number of team, you can do it within 2 years. You should be able to do it. And some other cases, some people can do it for like 1 year and some months. So depending on the amount of number of team members you have, because first of all, you have to first depend. It also depends on the reservoir. If, for instance, you just have just 1 or 2 reservoirs in your field, it's not a major stuff. What that means is you're just studying 2 reservoirs, and if there are any uncertainties you're trying to manage within those 2 reservoirs. But if, for instance, you have like 20 reservoirs in a field, where you have reservoir A, B, C, D, E, F all the way down, in that case, you can't just do it in a 3 months or 6 months. First, you have to do a complete seismic interpretation for some of these reservoirs, then try and build static models, structural model and static model. Then you do your dynamic model. For the ones that are producing, you do a history match and actually try to say, okay, what is the end of history? What is the remaining opportunities from each of them, from all of them? So that end of history, you have them like a polygon. So now what happens is that you now superimpose all the polygons you have together. So if, for instance, I have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. A, I have a polygon of where the remaining opportunity is. Maybe it's in the east. In B, I have a polygon of the remaining opportunities. Maybe it's in the west. In C, I have maybe it's in the center. I will get all those polygons from that end of history map and superimpose all of them together. Then I now begin to say, okay, how do I plan a well to target all of those polygons? Or can I use an existing well to target those polygons such that I'm able to also reperforate and get to produce those wells? That is the essence of trying to carry out these entire studies, because you also need to now look at, okay, in terms of the well performance, what is the production history? For instance, if you have a well, as I said, that's produced, imagine if a well was producing at a low BS and W, and all of a sudden that well quits. It's for you to also go back and check that there could be chances that that well did not actually quit. You know, the well might have quit on because you were actually producing on a very high choke. So if that well has equilibrated over years, if you go back there, you might be shocked that you will be able to produce some hydrocarbon from that same interval that you actually left for some years. So that's the essence of carrying out a very strong and robust integrated studies. So for the coning effects on the well, so I'll just share my screen again so that I could give that illustration. So please just confirm if you can see my screen.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Can you see my screen? Okay, so this, you have first well and you have a second well. So imagine this gas, this oil, this green here, I'm using as oil. What happens here is that if, for instance, my perforation, let me just do, I guess you can still see my screen, right?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so I'm just trying to do a simple illustration here to just show you what I'm trying to show. So imagine if my perforation was here. Imagine if my perforation was here. What that means is that because of coning effect, immediately I start producing this well at a very high choke rate, water begins to come in. And what happens? Once water begins to come in, we are not a water producing company now in this industry. Our focus is for the oil or the gas. So what that means is that this well is going to stop producing. Now, after this well has stopped producing for some years, you might have closed the well, leave it for like 3-4 years. The chances are high that when you go back to that well after some years, the contact would have equilibrated. And when that contact equilibrate, what happens is that you can now be sure that if I go back and even just by opening this perforation, I can still get to produce oil. Or rather, I might decide I might even shift my perforation, squeeze up this interval, and move shallower to reperforate. And I'll still get, in fact, I'll get significant volume. But as much as possible, if I'm trying to avoid the gas, then I need to be some feet away from the gas. But there are some other cases whereby if I have a gas facility already, I can still take my contact, even as close as technically close to the gas, such that after I begin to produce my oil, I want my gas to come. And one thing about gas is that gas expands, gas produces, you can produce a gas that is shallower from a deeper interval. The way this interval is, I can actually use it to produce that gas that is up there. What I just need to do is just to blow it on a very high choke rate. By the time I blow it on a very high choke rate, the gas will come in. So these are just some of the philosophies that one have to put in place when you're trying to plan your well. You notice that there's even an existing opportunity. This well produces at a very high choke rate, and that is why it's stopped producing. But now you can actually, after stabilization of the contact, after some years, you can actually go back there, reperforate, and get to produce that well. Then the other one where you talked about, the toe and the heel of the well, the essence of it is that when you have your contact, this is your gas contact. So if initially your gas contact is uniform, if you look at the pre-production contact, as you begin to produce your oil, your target is to produce oil. The reality is that, the way it is that the gas is looking for a way to find its way. And the preferential direction of that part of that gas is to race across that structure there towards the toe, towards the heel of the well. That toe or heel. Hope I didn't swap the name. Towards this part of the well. And once it graces towards it, what that means at the end of the day, you notice that you're going to be having significant gas coming in from here as compared to what you have here. So you see that you have here will be producing very cleaner oil, but towards this place, you see that you have significant gas production. And if you go and run a PLT log here, you notice that your PLT is going to show that significantly you have gas influence here. You have a significant higher GOR than what you have in this interval. And that was why I highlighted this as this other part, planning your well from this direction. If you plan it from this direction, you just notice that after a while, as you begin to produce your well, gas comes in. And once gas comes in quickly into your well, the chances are high that it might kill that well. And it turns out to become a gas well because gas has, higher distance than oil, higher mobility. So it will move faster than the oil. So that's it for that question. So I don't know if any other person has any question again.
Yeah, there are two other questions. Sorry, Dr. Anamnese,
Okay.
before you finish up with Nkechi's. You said PLT for the sake of some of us on the call. What's PLT?
Okay, so PLT is like is a log, is an acquisition log that when you acquire it, what it does for you, it tells you what the saturation is. For instance, this is a horizontal well. I want to know what the saturation is currently. Maybe this well has produced significantly. The PLT will tell you what the saturation is and the flow behavior around this well at the present condition. So that's the essence of it. The production log, that's the full meaning. Production log into. So it just helps you to tell, okay, what is the performance of this well in this particular location based on the current status of that well. That's what the PLT does for you.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks, Doc. Thanks, Julius. I see some of your comments on the chat box as well. Production login too. And then you've also been giving clarifications on one or two things. We sincerely appreciate that. I would now ask, I think we would need to clip this up, Harold and Danjuma, and then finally, maybe Julius can come up again so that we can end the question. So in that order, Harold, you can unmute and then ask your, before Harold comes up, Nkechi, I don't know if you're fine.
Oh, yes, perfect explanations. Thank you.
All right, yeah, you're welcome. So Harold, can you come up?
Thank you, David, for your wonderful presentation. I just have a short question, please. In a scenario where you want to carry out dual completion, and one of the targets have poor cement bonding, okay, and the other one has a good cement bonding. What is the implication in completing the two reservoir. And what can you advise in that situation? If one reservoir, after cementation, one reservoir have a very bad cement, the other one has a good cement.
Okay, so for cementing is very, very crucial. The essence of it is that you're trying to avoid communication behind the casing. So you can be shocked that in the cementing, if you've drawn your CBL log and you notice that one of the reservoir, let me say the shallow reservoir has a poor cement and the deeper one has a better cement, the best option is to just go ahead and produce just that deeper one alone. Except there are also another condition. Now you can go ahead and produce that deeper one alone. Now, if for instance you decide you want to produce the shallower one, it is on only one condition. And that condition is that you have how will I call it? A seal. That's a shale. When I have a shale above that reservoir and a shale below the reservoir that has significant integrity. So if I have a shale that is significantly higher and a shale that is significantly lower and has significant integrity, that shale can help to bridge that communication. And also you want to be also sure that the place where you have your reservoir also that you don't have water at the base. At least if it is a clean oil, no water contact, that word, you not see water contact, then you have significant shale above, significantly above, and significant shale below it. Then if you perforate it, you can be lucky. It will produce a cleaner oil for you. But if you don't have, if your cement is poor, and you immediately after that sand, you have just few feet away, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 feet away, you now have another sand, maybe that is even having water, maybe either above or below. The chances are high that water will enter that reservoir, and as you just start producing, before you know it, you turn to a water well. So as much as possible, you need to have a good cement bundle. If you don't have a cement bundle, then the next you begin to look at what is the integrity of the shale above it. So that means if my cement is poor, maybe the cement is not good, but I can manage it a bit. But what is that shale and below it, the one above and below it? How can I utilize those shale? Are those shale, do they have significant integrity such that it won't allow for communication from the shallower reservoir into that reservoir of target? Else, if it will allow for communication, then it's just better to go to the deeper one that has a good CBL and complete your well just on that one and feel okay than turning your well into a water well. Yeah, I hope that's it for me.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, you're welcome.
All right. Danjuma, can you come up?
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Doc, for a wonderful presentation as always too. So you mentioned something on commingling. I wanted to actually ask about it because most of us that are in the service world, we don't usually have much interactions with the commission. Somebody told me that commingling is now allowed by the commission. I don't know how true that is. And the other question I also wanted to ask is, what is the minimum volume that that the reservoir can be viable? And if there could also be another way that even though if it is not viable, that you can still produce it, maybe considering stacks of reservoirs that you have when you're developing the whole section or something like that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Danjuma. This is a very a very interesting question, really. So it is a question that most people might not be familiar with, and the reason I say is that there are a number of things that you as a technical person should be aware of, so that you can better manage your field. And one of those things is you talked about commingling. Now, naturally, the normal regulation does not allow commingling. However, you can actually build a case for it. When I mean building a case, imagine, for instance, let me say I have 4 reservoirs that are close to each other. And out of those 4 reservoirs, each of them has 500,000 barrels. Or let me say 400,000 barrels. 500,000. Let me use 500,000 barrels. So if the 4 reservoirs have 500,000 barrels, 500 as recoverable or not stoip, maybe the stoip might be 1 point something million barrels or thereabout. So if I have 500,000 barrels recoverable from each of the 4 of them, you think it is wise for me to just go and put one tube in each of them and be producing 200 barrels 200 barrels per day. I don't think it will be wise. Rather, in that case, I would rather prefer to go ahead and commingle the 4 of them. So by the time I combine the 200 barrels from each of these wells, it will give up to at least 200 times 4 to give me 800 barrels. Or even if I'm able to hump it up a bit high, increase the bit to about 1,000 barrels. So in that case, you see that the only way that I'm able to commingle is based on economic impact. What that means is that if I'm able to commingle, I can recover 1,000 barrels at a go. But if I don't commingle, I'll only be getting 200 barrels or 400 barrels. So now, if you look at it in terms of economics, will that pass economics? 200 barrels of oil for a well will not pass any economics. I'm not sure that well is in Niger Delta. Maybe it's somewhere else. Neither will 400 barrels of oil pass any economics. So, but as much as possible, one might decide, okay, maybe 1,000 barrels of oil might pass in economics using an idle well. So if I use an idle well to replan a well, if I can get 1,000 barrels, it might pass in economics. But in that case, what that means is that I'm trying to hold down commingle. Because if I don't commingle that well will turn to a 200 barrels well. So you need to now provide a justification to NUPRC. You don't just go ahead and commingle. You need to let them know, see, this is what we've noticed. And this field is a brown field. If we don't do anything, we are not able to recover this thing. We need your help. And you present your case to them. I think they will be able to consider that. So that's the reason for commingling. Commingling means you're trying to combine 2 to 3 or 4 reservoirs to produce them at the same time instead of producing 1 or 2 from a single tubing. That is commingling. Then
Yeah,
when you talk
sorry,
about
Doc.
minimum
Can I
volume,
also make
okay,
another comment as
yeah,
regards
sure,
that?
sure.
It would
Yeah.
also be good to consider the composition of the hydrocarbon present, such that if I'm producing from
Yes,
like 2
yes,
or 3
yes.
reservoirs, they need to be very similar for me to commingle.
Thank you very much. So sometimes my head is filled. This is a very wise contribution, please. Yes, it's also good. You need to do, you do some geochemical analysis on those fluid samples as well to be sure that the reservoirs have similar fluid properties. And also, someone has even mentioned the pressure as well. Imagine if the pressure is significantly different, nobody's going to allow you for that. So there are a number of things to also consider. It's not just about the production capacity, there are a number of things to consider too. You want to be sure that they have similar pressures and also the fluid properties are similar in terms of when you run their fingerprinting to actually see how you can actually produce them. So you don't just go ahead and commingle. Thank you for that contribution. Then the other one talks about the minimum volume. I think I've answered that question, that the reservoir can be viable. Okay. So minimum volume, as I said, is dependent on economics. So if, for instance, my economic, and every company have their economic benchmark based on, okay, what is the minimum I can produce? Some company might say, okay, each well, minimum a well should produce is 1,000 barrels. Based on the depth, maybe for instance, my reservoirs are about 4,000 feet or 3,000 feet or 5,000 feet of depth. Why some other people might tell you minimum well should be 2,000 barrels. Some might tell you minimum well should be 3,000 barrels. In the deep offshore environment, some will tell you minimum well should be 5,000 barrels or 8,000 barrels. Some might tell you 10,000. So it depends on the terrain and depends on the company strategy. So if you're dealing on a marginal field that is on the land, maybe it might do 2,000 barrels. But if you're going to deep offshore, shallow offshore environment, then that's to go higher because you need to also impact your well. You want to be sure that your production is going to pay for your well cost, your operation cost, and also at least you're going to make some significant profit from it in the time being. So that's the way it works. It's not a fixed value; it varies.
Okay,
Yeah. So
thank
any other
you so
question? Yeah.
much. Yeah, Danjuma, I don't know if that's fine. I think we need to just speed up now.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, yeah, you're welcome, Danjuma. So, in addition to the previous question asked, before I call on Julius, I think someone made a comment about
I think
if
okay. There is one more with you. Okay, maybe. Okay, continue.
Something about, can a cement squeeze job help in salt zones with poor cement? I know the previous question was something about if you have a poor cementing in one of the reservoirs, and then you need to produce, and then
Okay.
on the other reservoir, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So cement squeeze job is okay, but it has a caveat. And I mean a caveat. If, for instance, imagine if I'm trying to assess a reservoir that is a reservoir C. So I'm going to pass through reservoir A, B, C. Now, if in my reservoir C, I run a cement bond log, and the cement bond log is showing me that my reservoir C is where my cement is actually poor. I can go there and try to do a squeeze job because it's a deeper reservoir. But imagine if my cement bond log is poor in reservoir A, and that's my primary target. Sincerely, that's cement squeeze job. One has to be very careful with it, because in some cases, or in many cases, cement squeeze jobs for this kind of exercise, they just give you a poor result. They don't, in many times, they don't work. So as much as possible, that's why when people are running cement job, you try and sit the contractor or the vendor down and tell them, please, as much as possible, there are particular zones that are very important to us. The cement must be set. It must set very well at those zones, because those are the target regions. So you don't want to joke with that region, because many times cement squeeze job might not be successful. They're only successful when you're trying to use them to cover cave-ins in the subsurface. But when you're trying to use them to isolate reservoirs, depending on where the target point is, you might sometimes the jobs are not always very straightforward, and they can be dirty, so that you might not trust their results. So as much as possible, it's better to have a better cement than doing a cement squeeze job. But if you yourself you don't have an option, but even if you have to do it, please, even after the squeeze, go back and rerun a CBL to check what the result looks like before you go ahead and perforate.
Thank you, Abi. Thank you
All
so
right.
much. And
Yeah.
we'll just take Julius and Madubuchi, please.
Okay.
Julius quickly, and then we'll go to Madubuchi.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Sean, for the opportunity. Um, Good afternoon, everyone. My great friend, Dr. David, thank you so much. Um, I want to take you on the third bullet point of your conclusion, which is around planning new wells. And then I just want to tap from your wealth of experience, and what will you advise? In some cases, some of this marginal fee, they don't fully appraise the reservoir. So meaning the uncertainty still remain there in terms of what the opportunity down there really is in terms of hydrocarbon in place. And in many cases, when new drills are done, you go back complete, and then you start producing without even establishing where the hydrocarbon water content may be, and that still gives some gap to know what you can really unlock from that. And the question would then be, how do we convince business owner, for us to look at this and also deploy the best practice? Because actually, the fact that we can always go back for redevelopment. Imagine you have to have appraised your reservoir, the opportunity, and then you already know what you can recover from it. That will also help you to see it at the long run. What cost will I be putting in terms of facility sizing and all of that? But I still see that challenge still remain in this part of in this part of the world, where especially for the marginal field, where majority have produced beyond their initial in place, because of that gap of no appraising what the entire resources is down there. So that would be my question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Julius. So, sincerely, for many of the companies, the reality is that there are a lot of uncertainties in the contacts of the reservoirs. So, in many cases, you always find either oil down to, gas down to, and all that. And the reality is that now, after you produce, if your initial well, so oil down to, and you begin to produce that initial well, by the time the contacts move, you can't get the exact volume of what has been moved or what the initial is. So that uncertainty remains. The only thing people now get to do is that most times you just try and use if such thing has happened, if in the initial condition it was a down to, the reality is that once you started producing it, once the contact moves, you won't get an exact contact. So you can begin to use maybe an uncertainty rate you can decide to say, okay, if I take the contact to the beyond the spill point, what volume will I get? So those are just some of the things you begin to play around with. Because why? The existing well there actually saw it down to. So if you take it to the spill point, before the spill point, what value do I get there? So you can use that one also as another thing to use in running your initial history match. Then the other part is when you're trying to plan a well, as much as possible, it's always advisable that not all wells, depending on how the well planning phases are in different companies. For some companies, they are very aggressive. For us as a company, we are very aggressive in drilling. In some other companies, you might not be aggressive. Maybe you drill only one well in 2 or 3 years. The development is not going to be the same thing as us, because if you're going to drill one or two wells in 3 years, that means what you have to do is first you now need to look at all the opportunities you have. When you look at all the opportunities you have, as I said, you try to use a polygon to identify those opportunities. Just polygon and put them on depth. Then you superimpose all of them and put them on a map. Then you say, okay, if I plan a well across this polygon, how much of this polygon can I get? So in that case, now you've used one well to attach to. I try to see how you can use one well to actually get all these opportunities. And sometimes now, if for instance you have wells that have not even produced at all, you can use the original contact of that well, original contact of that map, and just superimpose it as well as a polygon. So in that case, you're saying, okay, if I have all of this, what uncertainties, if I even pass through what uncertainties do I get? Now you go to your cross section in your structural model. If I put all the contacts there, are there uncertainty down to that if I take this well just a bit, maybe that's not even the target reservoir. If, for instance, I have A, B, C, D, and my C reservoir is not my target reservoir in my planning in this of my well, but that well saw it down to, I can now decide to step out that well a bit such that it will see that contact. So by the time I step it out, it will help me to address some of the uncertainties there. So the essence of this is, okay, I'm stepping out well to see, okay, the uncertainty here is, so I'm going beyond the down to say, okay, could there be possibility that there could be hydrocarbon here since this particular reservoir has not even produced at all? So that's the essence of it. So as you're planning your well, you're listing your uncertainties and saying, if I go beyond the down to, could I actually recover more hydrocarbon? And also, if I'm looking at the initial case whereby my history match, and sometimes I've also noticed in the Niger Delta, most of us, our properties are very suppressed, reservoir properties. So initially, there's been an experiment that was done. When you try to use reservoirs, let me say, if I try to take the same reservoir of the same, let me say, will I use it as grain size? The same grain size. You know, if I use grain size of the same rock, finer grain size, coarse grain size, and even medium grain size, you might discover that the porosities, if they are well arranged at a good packing, their porosities might be similar. But in many cases, we always assume that the finer grain size, the porosity is going to be poor. Why? Because we believe in compaction. Now, it depends on the level. Compaction also varies as you go down the delta. So as you go deeper, definitely your compaction increases and your porosity gets to decrease. But at a particular depth, relatively shallower depth, your compaction is not that strong. So you might discover that thing which you feel you're producing higher, the porosity might be higher. In any cases, you might have a porosity of 0.3, 0.3 something. But in many cases, you come and see people having porosities of 0.18, 0.15, 0.16, and all of that. And in some other cases, you've seen cases where you have effect of mineralogies. So such that you might need to run an SRD, an X-ray diffraction, to actually confirm the mineralogy effect. So if you have sterilites and carolinites and they have significant impact on those reservoirs, you will notice that, oh, your porosities might be, you might be undershooting yourself in terms of the properties. So, but if you're able to notice that, you can begin to discount that in your petrochemical evaluation and say, okay, if I'm discounting this into my reservoirs, what impact does it, by the time I discount these minerals from my reservoirs, what impact does it have on the properties? And with that, you notice that your properties might actually get to become significantly higher than what it is initially. So in many cases, there are also cases where your properties might be low, and that might just be the problem of what you have. But in few cases, I don't think the structure, because if it is for brown fields that you have significant wells, structures are not usually the problem. Many times it boils down to properties or contact. Maybe the initial contact wasn't correct.
All right. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's it from
thank
me.
you again, Dr. Anamnese. And finally, Madubuchi, can you unmute and then quickly so that we can round up this session?
Hello, good afternoon, everybody.
Yeah, good afternoon.
So I guess we can all hear me. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you, Dr. David. Another not waste much of our time. I'll go straight into it. You made mention of availability of a sidetrack. So I'm confused about the word, that word sidetracking, and also the word cement squeeze. I don't know if you can throw more light on that. And also, during completion strategy, I don't know what is the process to come up with a completion strategy, and what can we do to incorporate the availability of other alternative, since it's possible for you to have a completion strategy which may not really be a completion strategy. And finally, during evaluation of brownfield, the reserves or the prospects, new prospects rather, were now discovered. I don't know, what's the process with the DPR? Do you report this, and how do you go about the general process? That's what I'm asking. Thank you very much.
Okay. I don't know how many your questions are, but I try to jot them as much as I can. Okay, so the first one, you were talking about sidetrack, right? So when we mean sidetrack means, you have an existing well, let me say well A, and you're trying to drill from that existing well. Maybe that well is no longer in use and the well has stopped producing for a long time. And you feel, well, I can utilize the same well. What you basically do is that you go back to that same well, and sidetrack from that well at a particular depth based on your target reservoir. So now when you're sidetracking from that well, usually you sidetrack, make use of a whipstock. So there's a whipstock they set at that particular depth and use that whipstock to actually sidetrack. So you don't just go and start drilling. There's a tool that they use in the sidetrack process. Now, when you sidetrack out of the mole shoe into the formation, then you begin to move towards the direction where you have your primary target. So let me just do a short illustration just to explain how that is done. Just a minute. Let me see. Sorry, just confirm if you can see my screen.
Yes, sir, I can see your screen.
All right, so I'm imagining this is a well. So this is a well, and I have an opportunity. Take another one. So I have an opportunity here. I have these contacts. So this is like a post-production contact. And I make a copy and I say this is like a deeper contact. So let me call this one. Let me just use a different color. It's just an illustration though. Original contacts, and I'll use yellow or purple as current contact. So here I have my original contact as my red, and I have my purple as my current contact. So what that means is that when I drill this well, I saw this red and I said, I want to go and produce from there. And my perforation was actually here. I placed my perforation here. I placed my perforation here. So as I place my perforation here, I said, okay, go ahead and produce this for me. you know. Now, after producing this for like 2 years or 3 years, this contact now had moved from here to the shallower one. So let me call this one initial and call this one current. So this one initial contact, initial OWC. Then I call this one present OWC. So this content has moved from my initial to the current OWC. So if I decide I want to sidetrack from here, what I'm going to do then is, since this well is no longer producing, the well is dry at the moment, I'll just go back to that same well, re-enter it and look at, okay, what favorable depths, because I want to produce this remaining one. At what favorable depth can I sidetrack? I'll just go in back there, you know, at a favorable, because you have to be looking at the dog leg severity as well. Then you can use a deviated well to go and produce that same well, to go and produce that same opportunity. So in that case, this my perforation here, I will now go and perforate in this newly deviated well. At that interval there. So this is simply sidetrack. So what that means that I have an original well that was drilled. The well has done its course. Main well. And this other one becomes my sidetrack well. And that's just what sidetrack means. Sidetrack means I have an existing well. Now, instead of me going to drill a fresh well, to intercept this reservoir and produce this upper part of the present water contact, oil contact, I'll just go from this existing well sidetrack. So in that case, what that means is that, first of all, the cost of acquiring this land at the top here, I've removed that cost. Now, the cost of drilling from this point here to this point, I've also removed that cost. What I'm only going to do is just put a whipstock at this point and drill through the mulch into the formation down to this reservoir. And you discover that the cost, what it will cost me to drill from here to here, will be relatively cheaper than drilling a fresh well. And that's just what drilling a sidetrack well means. So the second one, you're talking about cementing. So cementing basically means, as you're drilling a well, in any well you drill, there must always be a cement. You don't drill a well without cementing. Why? If, for instance, I have this as my well, or let me call it my casing. I believe most of us know, if I don't use well, I can use casing. If I have this as my casing, behind the casing, you always have, behind the casing, you always have your formation. So behind the casing, I have my formation. Now this formation is open behind the casing, so I need to go and fill it up with cement. If I don't fill it up, what am I doing? Hope I'm not. Use brown and send it back. So now I have my well bore and I have this behind the casing. Now I need to imagine if I'm targeting a reservoir at this point. If you're targeting a reservoir, let me just use this circle. Imagine if I'm targeting a reservoir at this point. No matter how it is, if there is no cement around this place, what happens is that water from the back of this casing will be entering inside this reservoir. If you remember that in the subsurface, there's significant pressure there. Even the water that you see in the subsurface is looking for a way to find its way to move in terms of capillary pressure, to find out how to move out. So if I don't have a cement behind there, water is going to find its way and enter this way, and it will turn to a water well. So as much as possible, you need to cement that region, the region outside of the perforation. So that's the essence of the cement. So such that once I perforate, I know what perforation does. Perforation is like a gun. Once I shoot in, it will just go into the formation, and that formation begins to flow into the well. That's the sense of what you have. But if I don't do cement, if I don't do proper cementing, you see that there will be communication across this fluid and water begins to come in as your oil is coming. But once there is cement, water will not move across the cement. It's only hydrocarbon that will be moving into the tubing. So that's your second question on cement. Then for completion strategy. So for completion strategy, basically it depends on how you want to complete your well. You can complete on different perspective. You can have 4 or 5 different completion strategy, and that's where the concept selection comes from. Imagine if I have reservoir ABC. Now, and it also depends on how much reservoir. Okay, let me do this by reservoir size. Let me say I have a small reservoir here. Now, this is just to give you an instance. I have a small reservoir here, and I have these two as big reservoir. If I'm going to complete, on, I'll put this one on my short string, and I'll put this one on my long string. I'm just giving an instance, and I'll put this on my long string. And what I mean is that this will go all the way up as long string, while this will go all the way up as short string. That's inside the well bore now. Not, I'm just drawing something as illustration. That's the way it works. So that means I'm producing this one on long string, this one on short string. Then I can decide to put this one behind sleeve. So this one, I'll just go ahead and seal this one and put it behind sleeve. I can just perforate and put it behind sleeve using a packer to separate it. So what that means is that once I finish producing this one, once I finish producing this short string, I'll go ahead and produce this other one, the shallower target. However, they are also similar, a different case. How do I put a different case? If this target is small, imagine if this target is small. If this target is small, what do you think I will do in this case? It will be a different, the completion strategy is going to change. Why? If I'm going to complete this one now, what I would do is that I'll put this one on long string. If I put this one on long string, I'll put this one behind sleeve on the long string. Because why? This one is going to produce for a short time. Imagine if, for instance, the volume I have here. Imagine if the volume I have here is about, let me say, 500,000 barrels. 500,000 barrels as in. Sorry, I don't like using in place. Recoverable. Imagine what I have here is recoverable 500 barrels, 500,000 barrels. I know it's very small. So for me to quickly, what I'll just do is just quickly go and produce this one. After producing, and I know the other one shallow is also small, I'll just come out here and produce the remaining 500 from here and I'll go. Because I wouldn't wait, because this one's going to produce for long. Imagine if this one, if what I have here is 3 million barrels. If I have 3 million barrels from here, will I come and start waiting for a very long time? I wouldn't do that. So those are all the things you put out in the completion strategy. I wouldn't come and wait, okay, 3 million barrels, because of 3 million barrels. After producing, I'll now come and produce 500,000 barrels. No. Then why would I produce this one and that leave that tubing now becomes a vacant without doing anything? Instead, once I finish producing this one, I'll go straight and go and produce this one on that same long string. Why this one will just be producing on the short string alone? What I'll just do is just to set a packer and separate it to isolate it. So the completion strategy depends on the volumes in each reservoirs, and that is actually the way you manage completion. Then for new discoveries in the course of your drilling, usually if you make new discoveries, so it depends on what you call new discoveries. New discoveries is that, is it an exploration well? If it's an exploration well, definitely you need to get it, approved. You won't go ahead and start developing it. But if it's not an exploration well, if it's in the course of drilling a well, maybe one thing that you found to be wet before, and now you now go just by stepping out, you now drill and find it as oil. That is not really it's a discovery in itself, but it's not exploration discovery. That one is just like an internal opportunity. In that case, what you just have to do is just write an addendum and let DPR know, engage DPR and let them know that, oh, there's, in the course of doing this well, this opportunity was found, and that will just be how to manage it. It is not a discovery. So usually when there's a discovery, DPR gives you a tax rebate for that, but I don't think they'll give tax rebates for a small opportunity that is within a reservoir. So I think that answers all your questions. I hope I answered them though.
I mean, thank you so much, Dr. David Anomnese, for this wonderful and insightful session. I mean, it's been very educative. I'm sure a lot of people on the call have so many things to go back with, and we're indeed very grateful. I'm sure, Doctor. In my opinion, I don't think Dr. Anamnese is just a senior production geologist. I think it's safe to also call him an artist because of the way he's brought all the different abstract things into life for us. I mean, it's really inspiring. Thank you so much. So before we allow before we come to the end of the session, I want to ask that you please give us another 5 to 10 minutes. So now we've asked Doctor
Okay.
some questions. So what would happen now is the Nape YP under the leadership of Flora Nusiobi has decided that for this session we'll now be asking the participants some questions. So how this will go will be that I'll read out some questions and anyone who feels like they have responses to them, just raise your hand. You'll be called upon to give answers to them. We'll try to do this as quickly as possible. And they also have some token and gifts to give out. Siloco will be here to also help out in this segment. So the first question will be, can you list some things to consider before planning a new well in a brownfield? Anyone? So for you to come up, you need to list like 2 things. Doctor, okay, Nkechi, yeah, you can go on unmute and then let's hear you.
Okay, things to consider. You
Yeah, you
have to
can mention
consider
2 things. Yeah. Okay.
okay, 2 things: uncertainties, then also the concept selection, then your
So when
surface
you
and
say
water limitation.
uncertainties, sorry, when you say uncertainties, is it I mean, can you just be more specific? Just give an additional to that so that it's not
Okay, you look at
big.
uncertainties in contacts and your
Okay.
dynamic and static models.
All right. All right. Okay. Yeah, you were
Okay.
going to say something else again.
Okay, then you can also look at your wellhead surface location. I'm just calling some
Okay.
things prior to the first one he said. First one he said is, do you have idle wells that are
Yeah.
lying around that you're not using? Then also, before you now go into this, then
Okay.
also
So I
look
will
at your
allow you
wellhead.
stop so that others can also enjoy and come up to share. Thank you so much, Nkechi. Please reach out to Siloko, who is the YP Publicity Secretary, to come up. Thank you. So can any other person can come up and then mention some other things to consider before planning new wells? Yeah, Julius, unmute and then let's hear you.
Okay, just to add to what Nkechi has said, business driver is key. You need to know what the well objective is going to be, and then every other thing follows. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Julius, and you've been um a big part of this conversation as well. Thank you for your contributions. Madubuchi, yeah, I would allow you on mute and then give us 1 or 2 other things before I ask like 2 other questions. And then I'll hand over to Siloko for announcements. Yes, Madubuchi, yeah, over to you. Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay, thank you very much.
Before you, sorry, I think Engineer George, apologies, please, apologies. I think Engineer George's hand was up before you. Let me allow Engineer George speak and then quickly Madubuchi will speak as well. So let's make that quick. Yeah, over to you, Engineer George.
Okay, considering the factors, talk about ranking opportunities, field development plan, field development plan.
Okay, okay. Thank you for the contribution. Please kindly reach out to Siloko and then it will pen your name down. Madubuchi, yeah, can you come up?
Okay, thank you. He spoke about the presence of existing facilities. He also talked about the I think that's where we talked about something more of an expansion for need for new wells. I think he went further to discuss on it, where I believe he linked it to commingling. Then I think also remaining opportunities present using a dynamic static model, something.
Okay, thank you so much. Brilliant responses. Thank you to all of you who have responded. Now, unfortunately for you, you wouldn't be able to answer the next questions. So we'll now leave the floor to every other person that has not spoken. So for the next question is, what is the importance of a sweep efficiency, or simply put, end of history map? I know it was explained, it was mentioned several times in response to 1 or 2 questions that have been asked and during the presentation as well. So again, I'll come again with the question, what is the importance of sweep efficiency? Or to explain that further, end of history map. So anyone, feel free on raise your hand and then you'll be called upon. Or you can just drop the answer in the chat box if you're in a very noisy place. We'll try and pick that as quickly as possible. Nkechi, I wouldn't want to call you. I want to, before, if there's no one coming up, then maybe I would have the need to call you. Engineer George, I would not want to call you as well. Can anyone who has not spoken just come up and try to give us what the importance is? It was a very it was a simple answer. It was a one sentence answer that was given during the presentation, and particularly I think a question that Nkechi asked.
Is there a gift attached to it?
Of course, there is a gift attached to it, but we shouldn't be answering questions because of this gift. So it's so that all of us can also share and enjoy the experiences of from each other. Yeah, but please feel free if you've not spoken before. All the hands I'm seeing up are those that have responded. So that's why I'm being reluctant to call on them. Okay, so since it looks like some other people are shy to come up, Engineer George, let's go. So what's the importance of sweep efficiency or end of history map?
Okay, the end of history map is looking at the new opportunities to be drilled and the optimum well placement.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so it gives us an idea of where to identify new locations to be able to drill the remaining opportunities. Thank you so much for that response. Again, I'll go to the next question. What is the difference between Arctic oil and bypassed oil? There was something that I think was mentioned somehow, just briefly during the presentation. Arctic oil and bypassed oil. Can anyone? Okay, Babalola, I see your hand up. Can you come up, unmute, and then let's hear you.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Hope you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, you are.
Okay. Arctic oil is the oil on at the crestal part of the structure. Like the example you showed during the presentation was on top of gas the other time. Why bypass oil was the oil that was not seen why they were producing or why they were producing. Thank you.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can
Okay,
hear
yes.
you, but at the
Yeah.
time, you know.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Shego. Yeah, just to put a further addition to that, I see Dr. Anamnese just smiling at all of what is happening here. But yeah, Arctic oil is just the oil above the current perforation depth, while bypassed oil is the oil that could not be produced using existing producing wells due to their drainage radius. I wouldn't want us to spend so much time. Thank you so much to all the contributors. Thank you so much, Nkechi, Julius, Engineer George, Madubuchi, Shegun. Thank you so much for your responses. And to every other person who has also made one or two contributions. I see some of your contributions in the chat box. I see Akimu, Olusegun, Oladipo, Athoja. I see all of you. Thank you. Thank you so much for making this really engaging. And once again, on behalf of the leadership of the Nape YP for this year, led by Flora Nusiobi, I want to once again thank you, Dr. David Anomnese, who is the senior production geologist at Seplat Energy PLC, on this brilliant and then very interactive topic, relatable topic to YPs, particularly on the basic principles for brownfield redevelopment. Thank you so much, Dr. David Anomnese, for choosing to share your knowledge and allowing us to gain from your wealth of experience. We're indeed very grateful. So I would hand over to Siloko now, who will give us one or two announcements, and then we can try and end this session. Siloko, if you're there, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Seun. Thank you so much, Dr. David, for this very insightful section that you've just finished. We're very grateful to have you. Just before we go briefly, I just want to give us some announcement about some of our upcoming events, such as this one that just concluded now. First on the list is the Nape YP Technical Workshop coming up in Kanu 2023. This is the first of its kind in a long time. Most of our technical sessions has always been held in the southern part of the country, but this is the first time we're actually trying to move towards the northern part, and it's holding in Kanu 2023. And the theme is repositioning the young professionals, skills and training for future energy dynamics. That is coming up in September 19th of August 2023, and it's going to be holding at the Faculty of Health and Environmental Sciences, Bayero University, Kano. The registration fee is 5,000 naira. So, as much as possible, if you want to sponsor any of the students that will be participating in this technical workshop, you can reach out to the NIPYP and we'll be able to see how to go about that. But for this workshop is going to be graced by Nape YP president, the Nape president, the vice chancellor of Bayero University, and deputy manager, NMPC, deputy manager franchise Aquatic NMPC. I can't really see that very well, but it's going to be graced by a lot of guests. Jiliba Jiboli is going to be around. So plan for that. And of course, we also have some other of our events coming up. And there's a Nape YP Data Analytic Bootcamp that is particularly programmed for young geoscientists that are looking to equip themselves with latest skills in data analytics and data science generally. And the team is data analysis using structured query language, which is Oracle SQL. This course is coming up in September 8th to it's a 4-week program that we encompass all of the training surrounding using SQL as a data analytics tool. So it's very important for those of us that are in the field of data science to take advantage of this course. The fee is just 15,000 naira per participant, and if you want to pay, you can reach out to the NAPE YP team to get yourself registered. Then, of course, in October, we also have our introduction to carbon capture, utilization, and storage (CCUS). It's going to be handled by Mr. Nwameka Onyegba. He's an associate. He's a production associate Tesla from Germany. Is the instructor for that technical program. Participants is just 5,000 naira per participant. So you should plan well for all of these. These are the forthcoming programs that are will be coming up in the forthcoming weeks. Then, of course, our monthly technical programs like the ones we just held now will also come up as well. Then I just want to also remind us about our dues, membership dues. For student members is 2,000 naira. For active members, 12,000 naira. Associate member is also 12,000 naira. So you can kindly get in touch with Abiriwa, is the one in charge of registration. You can get the numbers below. So want to encourage every one of us for coming to this webinar to listen to Dr. David. Dr. David, we want to thank you once more again for taking out the time to teach us today on this very interesting topic. And I want to encourage every one of us to always try to show up for our forthcoming programs and subsequent programs that will come up. Thank you, everybody. And I think this will be the end of the webinar for today. And I want to wish everyone a very refreshing weekend ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, leader.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you,
Bye.
Dr. David.